In the opulent halls of 17th century Vienna, where gilded chandeliers cast long shadows over polished floors and the scent of incense mingled with whispers of power, a young noblewoman named Lady Beatrice lived a life of privilege, expectation, and restraint. Born into a world of wealth and status, she was educated in the arts, languages, and etiquette, groomed from childhood to perform the role of the perfect aristocratic lady. Yet beneath the veneer of refinement, a complexity of mind and emotion festered, a quiet intelligence combined with a latent awareness of the limitations imposed by her gender and social position. She moved through her world with grace and composure, but the gilded cage surrounding her life concealed growing frustration, a simmering desire for autonomy, and, ultimately, the capacity for something darker than anyone could have imagined. Vienna itself was a city of contrasts. Amid its beauty, cultural splendor, and political sophistication, there existed shadows where secrets festered, ambitions clashed, and lives were quietly destroyed. The aristocracy prided itself on appearances. Elegance, manners, and public conduct were everything. Behind closed doors, however, domestic hierarchies, rivalries, and power struggles shaped the lives of those who dwelled within grand estates. For a young woman of Beatrice's standing, obedience was expected, personal desire irrelevant, and deviation from societal norms dangerous. Her life was a delicate balance between compliance and subtle assertion, a performance in which even minor missteps could invite scandal or punishment. From an early age, Beatrice displayed intelligence and perceptiveness beyond her years. She observed the nuances of human behavior, the subtle shifts in tone, the whispered conversations that revealed motives and loyalties. These observations, while often silent and internal, gave her a rare understanding of the power dynamics within her family, her household, and the broader courtly society in which she was raised. Unlike many of her peers, she grasped the fragile line between authority and submission, influence and vulnerability, freedom and constraint. Yet her mind, sharp and inquisitive, could not be fully satisfied within the boundaries imposed by her noble birth. The expectations that she marry advantageously, perform gracefully, and accept her limited agency created an internal tension that grew with each passing year. Her family, devoted to status and influence, viewed her qualities as assets to be deployed rather than personal gifts to be nurtured. Marriage, in particular, was seen as a tool to consolidate wealth, secure alliances, and enhance prestige. Beatrice, aware of these pressures, understood that her future would likely be dictated by decisions made for political and social gain, not by personal choice. The tension between personal desire and imposed duty became a central, defining feature of her early life, creating a psychological landscape marked by frustration, vigilance, and careful strategy. She learned to navigate expectations with subtlety, to comply outwardly while cultivating inner awareness and cunning, and to observe the behaviors of others with precision, all while maintaining the appearance of perfect obedience. It is within this environment of refinement, restriction, and unspoken tension that the story of Lady Beatrice begins, a story that would culminate in a shocking act of violence on a sacred morning, forever etching her name into the annals of dark history. The combination of intelligence, awareness, and latent dissatisfaction set the stage for choices that would defy societal norms, challenge moral expectations, and leave a legacy both horrifying and fascinating. Her life, carefully observed by contemporaries and later chroniclers, reveals the stark contrasts of aristocratic existence, beauty and brutality, civility and cruelty, appearance and reality. By understanding Beatrice's upbringing, her environment, and the constraints imposed upon her, we begin to see the forces that shaped her psyche and, ultimately, her actions. The gilded halls of Vienna, the expectations of nobility, and the intricate web of social and familial obligations created a pressure cooker in which ambition, intellect, and latent defiance combined to create a woman capable of extraordinary calculation and shocking transgression. This introduction sets the stage for a descent into the tension, strategy, and darkness that would define Lady Beatrice's life, culminating in a crime that shocked the city and echoed across history. By the time Lady Beatrice reached the age deemed appropriate for marriage, the pressures of her noble birth had intensified. In 17th century Vienna, a young woman of her status was expected to secure a marriage that would not only reinforce her family's social standing, but also expand its political influence. Personal desire was considered irrelevant, a faint whisper drowned out by the demands of lineage and legacy. Beatrice's beauty, intelligence, and education made her an enviable prospect, yet it also rendered her a tool in the hands of her father and advisors, a strategic piece to be moved at the discretion of those wielding power. It was under these circumstances that the arrangement with Lord Albrecht was proposed, a man of wealth, influence, and reputation, yet significantly older and far less concerned with affection than ambition. From the very outset, the marriage was less a union of hearts than a calculated contract, bound by convenience, social expectation, and political calculation. Lord Albrecht was a figure both respected and feared. He had inherited vast estates and titles, and his authority in the court extended far beyond his family's holdings. To the public, he was a distinguished nobleman, confident, articulate, and commanding. Yet behind closed doors, Albrecht's temperament was notoriously harsh, his treatment of those around him often cruel, calculated, and at times, unpredictable. Beatrice was acutely aware of the man she was to marry, not merely the image presented at court, but the private character whispered about in corridors, taverns, and among the staff who had served him for decades. Stories of his brutality towards servants and his strict, often humiliating expectations for women had already reached her ears. Despite the warnings, the marriage could not be refused. To her family, the union was ideal, advantageous, secure, and socially proper. The choice was made, and Beatrice, like so many young noblewomen before her, had no say in the matter. From their first meetings, Beatrice quickly understood that her life with Albrecht would be dictated by his authority. His eyes, calculating and sharp, seemed to measure her worth in obedience rather than companionship. Conversations were terse and formal, lacking warmth, and laden with subtle tests of compliance. Each word, gesture, and expression was evaluated, and the consequences of misstep, though often silent, were swiftly understood. Within weeks, Beatrice sensed the oppressive weight of her new life. The gilded cage of her childhood had transformed into a far more constrictive prison. While outward appearances demanded smiles, curtsies, and gracious words, inwardly she began to harbor resentment, a dark and quiet fury at the loss of autonomy that she had once only partially recognized. The household of Lord Albrecht was a fortress of control, its staff divided between loyalty to him and sympathy for the young bride who entered their world. Beatrice, observing silently, noted the subtle hierarchies and power struggles that mirrored her own position, respected by some, pitted by others, yet ultimately subject to a will stronger than her own. Albrecht's temperament left no room for error or independence. Simple decisions, when to eat, what to wear, how to conduct herself in private, were scrutinized. Even minor deviations were met with reprimands, often delivered with a cold, unyielding precision that instilled both fear and submission. The young bride found herself walking a tightrope, navigating each day with careful calculation, aware that any display of defiance could invite consequences far more severe than disappointment. Beyond the daily routines and relentless expectations, there were more sinister undertones in the marriage. Albrecht's jealousy was unpredictable, his suspicion of Beatrice's loyalty extending to her interactions with family, servants, and acquaintances alike. Whispered conversations were monitored, letters scrutinized, and private moments invaded by the weight of his authority. Beatrice, intelligent and perceptive, quickly learned to conceal her true thoughts, to mask her emotions behind a veneer of composure, and to speak only when permitted. Her inner world, rich with imagination, longing, and quiet rebellion, became a refuge from the harsh reality of her circumstances. It was within this private mental space that she began to cultivate strategies, to contemplate limits, and to imagine possibilities beyond mere survival. Historical context further illuminates the pressures that Beatrice faced. Vienna's aristocratic society was rigidly patriarchal, and women of noble birth were expected to be beautiful, obedient, and politically useful. Marriage was a transaction, a means to fortify alliances, consolidate wealth, and secure social standing. Love, companionship, or personal satisfaction were largely irrelevant. Women who challenged this system faced ostracism, loss of status, and social ruin. Beatrice, fully aware of these stakes, understood that her marriage was both her reality and a reflection of centuries of social expectation. Her resentment, therefore, was not simply personal but systemic, a response to the structures that demanded submission and rewarded conformity. Despite the bleakness of her circumstances, Beatrice was not entirely without agency. She observed her surroundings with acute attention, noting Albrecht's routines, weaknesses, and moments of distraction. Each observation sharpened her understanding of control, power, and vulnerability. She began to see patterns in his behavior, the precise timing of his moods, the subtle cracks in his otherwise formidable demeanor. In these patterns, she found small opportunities for influence, moments where her intelligence and strategy could assert themselves, even within the confines of oppression. These insights, though limited in scope, were empowering, allowing her to navigate her daily existence with a sense of cautious mastery, even as resentment simmered beneath the surface. Social life added another layer of complexity. Beatrice was now thrust into the public eye, required to attend formal events, entertain influential figures, and perform the role of the ideal noblewoman alongside a husband who demanded perfection. Each interaction, each bow and polite smile, was a calculated performance. Yet, even amidst the crowds and glittering banquets, she felt isolated, her intellect and emotions trapped behind a mask of compliance. The disparity between her inner life and outward performance grew ever more pronounced, feeding a quiet storm of frustration, ambition, and suppressed anger. By the time she had spent months under Albrecht's roof, the young noblewoman's life had become a delicate balance of survival, observation, and internal rebellion. She understood the consequences of defiance, yet she also understood the limits of control, the moments when strategy could be applied, and the opportunities that lay hidden in routine, tradition, and expectation. The marriage, intended to secure social advantage and obedience, had instead become a crucible in which Beatrice's mind, patience, and darker inclinations were forged. It was within this union of convenience, masked as propriety and stability, that the seeds of tragedy were sown, setting the stage for a drama that would unfold in horror and history alike. Life within Lord Albrecht's estate was a study in subtlety and tension, a carefully choreographed performance in which every gesture, glance, and word held weight. Lady Beatrice, acutely aware of the eyes and ears surrounding her, quickly learned that the halls of her new home were rife with whispers, secrets, and hidden rivalries. The servants spoke in hushed tones, casting furtive glances toward the young bride, their conversations laced with sympathy, suspicion, and sometimes fear. These whispers became a constant backdrop to Beatrice's days, an invisible chorus that both informed her and unnerved her. Rumors of her husband's infidelities circulated quietly, along with speculation about her own behavior and potential schemes. In a world where reputation was as fragile as glass, each secret held the potential to ignite scandal, betrayal, or violence. Beatrice, sharp-eyed and intelligent, observed everything with the meticulous attention of a strategist. She noticed the subtle shifts in tone when Albrecht addressed the staff, the nervous glances exchanged in her absence, and the barely perceptible tension that hung over certain rooms of the estate. Even the walls seemed to echo with unspoken stories. She learned that loyalty among servants was often conditional, shaped by fear, ambition, or the hope of personal gain. In this environment, deception became a survival skill, and knowledge of others' intentions a form of power. The young noblewoman, constrained by her role, found herself cultivating relationships cautiously, testing loyalties, and quietly assessing where influence could be gained and where danger lurked. Psychologically, these early months in the household were draining. Beatrice experienced a mixture of isolation, frustration, and simmering anger. She had been taught to be compliant, to present an image of obedience, and to accept the limitations placed upon her by society and by her husband. Yet the reality of her marriage was far harsher than any lesson could have prepared her for. Albrecht's unpredictable temper and cruel remarks stifled her, and his constant monitoring of her interactions made every action fraught with peril. The whispers she heard from the staff and the knowledge of her husband's rumored indiscretions fueled both resentment and a sense of injustice. She began to see her life as a delicate game, where missteps could have devastating consequences, yet opportunities to assert influence, even quietly, were still possible. The atmosphere of secrecy extended to every corner of the estate. Private letters were intercepted or scrutinized. Notes and messages carried messages of caution or veiled warnings. Beatrice learned that even a small lapse in discretion could be dangerous. Despite this, she sought subtle ways to assert her agency, forming alliances with those who showed her sympathy, and collecting information about the estate, its routines, and its inhabitants. She became increasingly aware of the vulnerabilities of those around her, including her husband, whose public authority masked private flaws, insecurities, and patterns of behavior that could be exploited. These observations sharpened her understanding of strategy, patience, and the art of manipulation, skills that would later play a pivotal role in her actions. Jealousies, both overt and covert, shaped the social landscape of the household. Other women, relatives, or acquaintances sometimes viewed Beatrice as a threat, their envy manifesting in subtle slights, gossip, or undermining behaviors. Meanwhile, servants and attendants navigated a complex web of fear and loyalty, their allegiances shifting in response to perceived power and protection. Beatrice recognized the psychological tension in these interactions, noting that human behavior often revealed more in its hidden motives than in its surface politeness. She began to cultivate a careful awareness of the emotional and psychological terrain, understanding that information was currency, and that small actions could ripple into profound consequences. Within this charged environment, Beatrice's inner life became increasingly active and complex. She wrestled with feelings of betrayal, anger, and the desire for autonomy, exploring, in secret, the darker recesses of her imagination. Nights were often spent contemplating hypothetical scenarios, analyzing possible outcomes of actions taken or withheld, and considering the moral and practical implications of rebellion. While outwardly she maintained composure and grace, inwardly she was calculating, observing, and planning. These secret mental exercises were not mere fantasy. They were an essential form of psychological survival in a household where misjudged words or actions could provoke punishment or social ruin. Some relationships in the estate offered brief solace. A loyal servant here, a sympathetic relative there, provided occasional companionship and understanding. Yet even these connections were fraught with risk. Trust had to be measured carefully, for betrayal was always possible. Beatrice's keen intelligence allowed her to navigate these treacherous waters, forming alliances that were cautious but meaningful, and using these relationships to gather knowledge about her husband's routines, moods, and vulnerabilities. This subtle network of observation and influence gave her a sense of power, however limited, and strengthened her capacity for strategic thinking, laying the groundwork for decisions that would later defy societal and marital constraints. The combination of isolation, observation, and whispered secrets created an intense psychological crucible. Beatrice's thoughts grew darker and more deliberate, her curiosity about human weakness and social manipulation deepening with each day. She began to understand the mechanics of fear, control, and persuasion, seeing how these forces could be directed to achieve specific ends. Her perception of the household's internal politics, her husband's vulnerabilities, and the limited opportunities for autonomy sharpened her strategic thinking, preparing her for actions that, once taken, would alter the course of her life irrevocably. As the months passed, tension in the household intensified. Beatrice became ever more aware of the sharp contrast between appearances and reality. Publicly, she remained the perfect noblewoman, elegant, composed, and dutiful. Privately, she wrestled with emotions of anger, fear, and latent rebellion. The whispers, the secret observations, and the betrayals of those around her contributed to an evolving awareness of human nature and her own capabilities. She learned to use subtlety as a weapon, patience as a shield, and knowledge as leverage. The seeds of a darker resolve were sown, rooted in years of constraint, observation, and calculated frustration. By the end of this period, Lady Beatrice had become a master of quiet calculation, aware of both the power and danger inherent in her situation. The whispers in the halls, the jealousies, and the betrayals of others were not merely background noise. They were lessons in survival, strategy, and psychological warfare. Every secret she discovered, every rumor she heard, every subtle sign of her husband's weakness or cruelty, reinforced the growing realization that her destiny was not fixed, and that, with careful planning, the gilded cage in which she lived might yet be shattered. The stage was set for the dark and dramatic events that would soon unfold, as observation and cunning would converge into decisive and irreversible action. Easter morning arrived in Vienna with the promise of celebration and solemnity, yet within the walls of Lord Albrecht's estate, tension coiled like a hidden serpent. Lady Beatrice awoke before dawn, the pale light of the winter sun casting long shadows across the ornate chamber that had become both her home and her prison. She moved quietly, every step deliberate, every breath measured, aware that any miscalculation could betray her intentions. The day itself, sacred and serene for the city's citizens, would soon become the backdrop for an act that would shock Vienna for generations. The contrast between the morning's sanctity and the darkness simmering within her mind sharpened the intensity of the moment, imbuing every decision with a gravity that both exhilarated and terrified her. Her preparations were meticulous. Beatrice had long observed her husband's habits, noting the precise rhythm of his morning routines, the servants' movements, and the timing of the household rituals. Each element was now a piece of a carefully orchestrated plan. She ensured that her own attire, modest and unremarkable to the untrained eye, would not attract attention. The tools of her intent were hidden in plain sight, cloaked within everyday objects, a testament to her cunning and patience. Every choice she made reflected an intimate understanding of the estate's rhythms, of her husband's predictability, and of the small vulnerabilities she had patiently catalogued over months of careful observation. The psychological tension coiled tighter with each passing moment, her mind alive with anticipation, fear, and the thrill of imminent action. As the household began to stir with the rituals of Easter, Beatrice's resolve hardened. Servants moved silently, unaware of the storm gathering. Her psychological mastery and careful preparation had created a moment where chaos and order existed simultaneously, a fleeting but indelible triumph of strategy over circumstance. By the end of the morning, the consequences of her act were inevitable. Albrecht was dead, the household irreversibly altered, and Lady Beatrice's life transformed from constrained noblewoman to the orchestrator of a crime that would echo through Vienna's history. The sacred light of Easter morning, once a symbol of hope and renewal, had become a witness to death, deceit, and human cunning. The psychological and emotional complexity of the event, the mixture of triumph, fear, calculation, and horror, set the stage for the investigation, the trial, and the enduring legend that would define her legacy. In that single morning, Beatrice had crossed a threshold, one from which there was no return, and history would remember both the horror and the cunning with which she had executed her deadly plan. The moment Lord Albrecht's lifeless body was discovered, a ripple of shock and fear swept through the estate. Servants froze, their eyes darting nervously toward one another, each trying to process the horror that had invaded the sanctity of their home. Lady Beatrice, composed on the surface, moved with deliberate calm, masking the adrenaline that coursed through her veins. Months of careful observation, planning, and psychological preparation had taught her the value of timing and presence of mind. Every movement, every word, had to be calculated, for a single misstep could unravel the delicate control she had maintained over the situation. The estate, once a familiar labyrinth of routine and hierarchy, had become a stage where suspicion, fear, and judgment played out in quiet, tense whispers. News of the murder quickly spread beyond the walls of the household. Vienna, a city accustomed to intrigue, whispered in astonishment at the tale of a noblewoman who had defied both convention and law. Magistrates and investigators arrived, their presence formal yet penetrating, their eyes keenly assessing not only the crime scene, but also the behavior of those within the household. Beatrice, acutely aware of the scrutiny, maintained an air of sorrowful dignity, her expressions carefully crafted to convey grief and shock. The tension between her inner confidence and outward composure became a silent performance, a psychological dance that she executed with remarkable skill. The investigation was methodical, reflecting the judicial procedures of 17th-century Vienna. Magistrates interviewed servants individually, probing for inconsistencies, hidden motives, or signs of complicity. Each question, each pause, was a test of observation and wit. Beatrice anticipated the lines of inquiry, ensuring that her reactions, her answers, and even her silence aligned with the narrative she had carefully constructed. The staff, aware of her intellect and the subtle dominance she wielded within the household, found themselves caught between fear and loyalty. Her calm, deliberate behavior influenced perceptions, subtly guiding suspicion away from her while ensuring that she remained above reproach. Forensic analysis of the time, though rudimentary by modern standards, played a significant role in shaping the investigation. The scene was examined for signs of struggle, the placement of objects, and any evidence that might indicate premeditation. Beatrice, having anticipated such scrutiny, ensured that her planning accounted for these observations. Every detail had been considered: the positioning of the room, the concealment of the implements of the act, and the absence of obvious indicators that might betray her involvement. Her foresight transformed the physical space from a potential trap into a controlled environment, a testament to her meticulous preparation and psychological acuity. Beyond the technical aspects, the investigators sought to unravel motive and opportunity. They probed relationships within the household, delving into the dynamics between Beatrice, her husband, and the staff. Her outward composure, combined with her intelligence, created an ambiguous impression. She appeared simultaneously vulnerable and resolute, sorrowful, yet quietly strategic. This duality fascinated observers, introducing doubt, curiosity, and speculation into the investigation. Her psychological mastery, honed over months of constrained observation, allowed her to navigate the interrogations with a deftness that frustrated and intrigued the authorities alike. The servants, caught between fear and conscience, became the primary sources of information. Whispers of prior tensions, subtle observations of unusual behavior, and accounts of minor conflicts were all scrutinized. Beatrice had long understood the importance of controlling perceptions among those closest to her. Through careful manipulation, subtle cues, and the cultivation of selective trust, she ensured that potential informants offered information that aligned with her narrative. The psychological interplay between master, mistress, and staff became a chess game, each move designed to protect her, maintain authority, and shape the course of the investigation. Public reaction added another layer of complexity. The notion that a noblewoman could commit such a brazen act shattered social expectations and ignited discussions across Vienna. Chroniclers and gossipers speculated endlessly, framing the act within moral, religious, and social contexts. Beatrice's gender, status, and outward demeanor became focal points, illustrating both the fascination and fear provoked by a woman who transgressed societal norms so radically. Her actions challenged the rigid hierarchy of authority, propriety, and gender roles, leaving a profound impression on both contemporaries and later historians. Psychologically, the aftermath was a crucible. Beatrice experienced a mixture of relief, tension, and ongoing calculation. The act had been completed, yet the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Every interaction with servants, officials, and visitors required constant awareness, every word measured for impact. She understood that the success of her plan depended not only on the act itself, but on her ability to navigate the complex web of investigation, suspicion, and social expectation that followed. The mental effort, the constant vigilance, and the psychological tension were both exhausting and intoxicating, a testament to the profound stakes involved in her survival and continued dominance. As the investigation progressed, Beatrice's understanding of human behavior became increasingly evident. She anticipated potential pitfalls, interpreted the subtle reactions of those around her, and adjusted her demeanor to exploit their assumptions. Each interrogation, each observation, reinforced the precariousness of her position while simultaneously demonstrating her capacity to manipulate perception. The tension within the estate, the undercurrent of fear, and the fragile balance of control reflected the delicate intersection of strategy, psychology, and circumstance. By the end of the first week, it was clear that Beatrice's careful planning had yielded results. While investigators continued their inquiries, her calm demeanor, strategic behavior, and deep understanding of human psychology allowed her to maintain a position of relative security. The household, once a space of rigid hierarchy and silent observation, had transformed into a theater of tension, observation, and suspicion. Lady Beatrice's intellect, composure, and cunning had carried her through the immediate aftermath of a crime that shocked Vienna, setting the stage for the courtroom drama, public scrutiny, and historical legacy that would follow. The trial of Lady Beatrice commenced under the heavy weight of public scrutiny, drawing the eyes of Vienna and its aristocracy alike. News of the murder had already traveled across the city, whispered in markets, coffee houses, and courts, and the anticipation of seeing a noblewoman accused of such a heinous act sent shockwaves through society. Courtiers, citizens, and journalists alike gathered, each eager to witness the unraveling of a life once considered impeccable. The courtroom, a grand chamber adorned with frescoes and carved wood, became a theater of morality, power, and human intrigue. It was here, amidst the formal pomp of law and ceremony, that Beatrice's fate would be determined, and her reputation, already fragile, would hang precariously in the balance. From the moment she entered the chamber, Lady Beatrice's presence commanded attention. She carried herself with the poise, composure, and grace that had long masked her inner cunning. Every step, every gesture, every carefully measured glance reinforced the image of the dutiful and sorrowful widow, even as the whispers of scandal threatened to undermine her. Observers noted the striking contrast between her elegant demeanor and the shocking nature of the accusations. She was at once vulnerable and calculating, embodying a paradox that fascinated the public and unnerved the authorities. The trial became as much about perception as about the law, and Beatrice understood that mastery of appearance was as critical as mastery of argument. The prosecution laid bare the details of the murder with chilling clarity. They recounted the meticulous planning, the timing of Easter morning, and the precision with which the act had been executed. Witnesses, including servants and acquaintances, testified about her movements, her interactions with Lord Albrecht, and subtle signs of tension within the household. Every narrative was framed to emphasize premeditation, cruelty, and moral transgression. The prosecution's aim was to paint a portrait of cold calculation, demonstrating that the crime was not a momentary lapse of judgment, but a deliberate, conscious act designed to eliminate her husband. The courtroom was tense, every word carrying the weight of societal judgment and moral outrage. Beatrice's defense, equally strategic, relied on the mastery of psychology, poise, and social perception. Her lawyers emphasized her suffering, the oppressive nature of her marriage, and the emotional strain she had endured in a household dominated by cruelty and control. They painted her as a woman trapped by circumstance, a victim of a rigid social system that afforded her little autonomy and even less protection. Beatrice, observing every reaction, modulated her expressions to evoke sympathy, grief, and the quiet dignity expected of a noblewoman facing tragedy. Her ability to manipulate perception, to balance vulnerability and composure, became central to the courtroom drama, creating doubt even in the minds of the most skeptical observers. Public fascination with the trial was immense. The story of a noblewoman committing murder against the backdrop of Easter, a sacred day, was a narrative that blended shock, morality, and psychological intrigue. Chroniclers documented every detail, amplifying the tension and moral ambiguity of the proceedings. Citizens debated the implications. Was Beatrice a monster, a victim, or something in between? The trial was not merely a legal proceeding. It had become a spectacle, a lens through which society examined gender, class, morality, and the limits of authority. Beatrice, fully aware of the spectacle, navigated the attention with calculated care, understanding that perception would influence both verdict and legacy. The testimonies revealed the intricate web of relationships within the household, highlighting jealousies, alliances, and betrayals. Beatrice's interactions with servants, confidants, and acquaintances were scrutinized for hidden motives or evidence of premeditation. Each question posed by the magistrates, each objection raised by attorneys, was a probe into the complex psychology of a woman who had defied expectation and law. Her calm demeanor, precise responses, and subtle expressions of grief created a tension between the severity of the act and the appearance of propriety, complicating judgments and heightening the drama of the trial. Psychologically, Beatrice's mastery of her own presentation was remarkable. She understood the power of silence, the weight of a well-timed glance, and the emotional resonance of measured gestures. Her defense did not rely solely on legal argument. It relied on the art of perception, the careful orchestration of public emotion, and the manipulation of social expectation. The trial became a contest not only of evidence and rhetoric, but of charisma, perception, and psychological insight. Observers would later note that her ability to maintain composure under intense scrutiny was extraordinary, reinforcing the paradoxical fascination that surrounded her character. The verdict, when delivered, reflected the complexity of both the crime and the societal perceptions surrounding it. Beatrice's social standing, intelligence, and composed demeanor influenced public interpretation, even as the evidence of murder was undeniable. The trial cemented her place in history, not merely as a perpetrator of crime, but as a figure of psychological intrigue, moral ambiguity, and social transgression. Her story, recounted in chronicles, letters, and folklore, would endure precisely because of the tension between her outward appearance and the darkness of her actions. In the end, the courtroom became a stage for both justice and legend. Lady Beatrice's presence, behavior, and strategic manipulation of perception demonstrated the extraordinary interplay of intellect, psychology, and circumstance. The trial immortalized her, not only in the annals of crime, but in the imagination of a society captivated by the shocking inversion of expectation. A noblewoman, elegant and poised, capable of murder, cunning, and survival. The events of that trial would echo far beyond the walls of the chamber, shaping public discourse, inspiring fascination, and leaving a legacy that blurred the lines between horror, sympathy, and historical intrigue. The story of Lady Beatrice of Vienna did not end with the courtroom's final pronouncement. Rather, it continued to echo through the streets, halls, and chronicles of the city, reverberating across generations. The murder of Lord Albrecht on Easter morning, a sacred day meant for reflection and renewal, became a lens through which society examined morality, power, and the limits of obedience. Beatrice's actions challenged not only the rigid social structures of 17th-century Vienna, but also the expectations placed upon women of noble birth. Her story became a paradoxical legend, a cautionary tale of cruelty, cunning, and moral transgression, and simultaneously a testament to intelligence, strategy, and psychological mastery. It was a story that haunted minds, both then and in the centuries that followed, blurring the line between horror and fascination. Historical accounts of Beatrice's life and crime varied in tone, reflecting the biases and preoccupations of their authors. Some depicted her as a monstrous figure, a woman who allowed ambition and rage to override conscience, violating the sacred trust of marriage and societal law. Others portrayed her as a tragic figure, a victim of circumstance, trapped in a gilded cage of wealth, expectation, and oppression, whose intellect and courage could not be contained. The duality of these interpretations reflects the enduring tension at the heart of her story. The interplay between morality and survival, cruelty and ingenuity, societal expectation and individual agency. Scholars, chroniclers, and storytellers alike have struggled to reconcile the woman Beatrice was with the crime she committed, creating a narrative rich in psychological and moral complexity. Beatrice's infamy was amplified by the sensational nature of her crime. The murder's timing on Easter, the sacred resonance of the day, and the brutality of the act itself created a shocking contrast that captured the public imagination. People spoke in hushed tones of the paradox, a noblewoman, trained in etiquette, art, and propriety, capable of calculated murder. Her intelligence, strategic planning, and composure in both crime and trial became focal points of discussion, highlighting the unsettling intersection of intellect and immorality. The story provoked debate on gender, power, and societal constraint, forcing contemporaries to confront uncomfortable truths about ambition, repression, and human nature. The psychological legacy of Lady Beatrice is particularly striking. Her ability to manipulate perception, control outcomes, and navigate complex social and emotional landscapes demonstrates a profound understanding of human behavior. She anticipated the reactions of servants, magistrates, and the public, orchestrating her actions with a combination of foresight, patience, and strategic thinking. This psychological acumen, while employed for a dark and violent purpose, reveals the extraordinary intellectual capacity that circumstances had sought to suppress. It is precisely this tension between the brilliance of her mind and the moral transgression of her act that continues to captivate historians and audiences alike. Moreover, Beatrice's story raises enduring questions about morality and societal expectation. To what extent does oppression justify rebellion? At what point does cleverness become cruelty? Can the strategic mind be disentangled from the ethical consequences of its actions? These questions, arising from her life and crime, are not merely academic. They resonate with fundamental human concerns about justice, freedom, and the constraints imposed by society. Beatrice's narrative forces reflection on the complex interplay of circumstance, choice, and consequence, illustrating how historical events can illuminate enduring moral dilemmas. Her legacy also extends to the cultural and literary imagination. Tales of noble women, constrained by wealth and expectation, yet capable of transgressive cunning, appear across literature and folklore, often echoing the dramatic contours of Beatrice's story. Artists, playwrights, and chroniclers found in her life a compelling study of contrast, light and dark, propriety and sin, intelligence and destruction. The vivid imagery of a serene Easter morning transformed into a scene of murder, the meticulous orchestration of a crime juxtaposed with public composure, and the strategic navigation of courtroom scrutiny all contributed to a narrative that resonates with both horror and fascination. In this sense, Beatrice's life transcended mere history, entering the realm of legend, archetype, and psychological case study. The moral complexity of her legacy is further reflected in modern historical interpretation. Scholars examine not only the crime but the environment that shaped her, a rigidly patriarchal society, the oppressive demands of noble expectation, and the subtle forms of control exercised over women's lives. Her actions, while legally and morally condemnable, are contextualized within a framework of social constraint, power dynamics, and psychological pressure. In this way, her story offers insight into the broader structures of 17th-century aristocratic life, revealing how social, gendered, and psychological factors intertwine to shape human behavior in extreme circumstances. Ultimately, Lady Beatrice's legacy endures because it embodies contradiction. She is simultaneously a villain and a product of her environment, a figure of horror and a demonstration of cunning, a cautionary tale and a subject of fascination. Her story challenges viewers, readers, and historians to confront uncomfortable truths about human ambition, societal expectation, and moral ambiguity. It compels reflection on the costs of oppression, the consequences of intelligence employed for transgression, and the ways in which circumstance can shape destiny. Even centuries later, the tale of the noblewoman who murdered her husband on Easter morning resonates with the same dramatic tension, psychological intrigue, and moral complexity that defined her life and crime. Lady Beatrice's shadow stretches across history not only as a record of a shocking act, but as a study in human complexity. Her intelligence, strategic mind, and mastery of perception ensured her place in infamy, while the circumstances of her life evoke both sympathy and horror. In this duality lies the enduring fascination of her story, a reminder that history is often neither simple nor comfortable, that brilliance and darkness can coexist within a single individual, and that the boundaries of morality and survival are often intertwined in ways that defy easy judgment. Her tale, preserved in chronicles, folklore, and psychological reflection, continues to captivate, provoke, and unsettle, reminding us that the shadows of history often hold the most compelling stories.